Some time ago, the excellent Pratt Chat podcast raised a question as to the origin of the Igorths in Discworld. Almost instantly, I had an answer. Hi, I'm Lachlan Kingsford, and this is my story Igorth, or A Modern Prometheuth. And here we are, in a timeless castle, in a grand duchy, on a band of mountains, floating on the back of an ancient turtle. Worcester sat in his cloak of finest azure, and regarded his trusty retainer. Reginald, with not a greying hair out of place, patiently stood in front of a board showing a scientific diagram of the latest astrozoological discovery of the age. Hugo Worcester was younger than many of his cohort, but by comparison to his loyal valet, was positively ancient. Worcester raised a perfectly manicured finger. Deep in thought, carrying nearly 300 years of weight, the vampire responded, "Yes, but it's all a bit daft, isn't it?" "Sir?" Worcester continued his line of thought, as it were. "Well, turtles? I had a turtle once. It had a long neck and a deep shell. You mean to tell me that one of those is carrying our world?" Reginald responded with his particular brand of infinite patience. "Quite so, sir. And I'm given to believe it is further posited that there may be further members of Astro-Anomalia involved. Couldn't even teach Warwick any tricks. He pulled his head in his little shell and laid an egg. Sir might indeed find that Warwick may have been a female turtle." Worcester was a little out of sorts. The very thought of inspecting the backside of a turtle for what might delicately be called dangly bits almost turned his pale skin quite red. Reginald continued, "Sir, on the subject of, to not put too fine of a point on it, new life, has Sir considered my proposal?" "Well, it's all a bit complicated, isn't it?" The vampire stared into Reginald's eyes. He considered that it was almost certain that he had gotten away without giving any sign that he had completely forgotten what Reginald had proposed. That was weeks ago. There had been games of tennis, the whole affair with his aunt and cousin Bernadetta, the proposal to Contessa narrowly avoided, the proposal of his chum Terence to Victoria narrowly retained. He seemed to remember it involved some equipment being installed in the castle and, oh yes, that was it, lightning. "The theory, sir, one assures you is quite sound. Without making presumptions, sir, might want to start considering succession planning." "Nonsense, Reginald. I am 296 and a half, and I'm fit as a fiddle." "Sir, my succession. If sir may be reminded, the natural lifespan of the average human is somewhat limited compared to the average, if you might indulge me, creature of the night." "What, 150 years?" "Somewhat shorter again, sir. Suffice to say, my appointment with death appears closer each day." "Well, we can't have that, can we? Be a good chap, go get a syringe or straw. We could do the old slurpy derpy." Reginald interrupted. He had smoothed Worcester's plans and foibles for what felt like an eternity, but was merely most of his life. Reginald was, unusually for a valet, apprenticed as a barber and surgeon. Whilst more skilled than most with a knife, he developed a reputation not merely for healing men, but solving their problems. One day, the Lady Margalotta sought Reginald out. They had known each other only by reputation, but the lady assured Reginald that the opportunity to serve her nephew was a role not to die for. She arranged Reginald to be trained by Jenkins, her own valet, and then set him loose on her nephew and the cacophony of mishaps that followed his way. "Thank you, sir, but no. My time approaches. I am an old man, but if sir recalls, we may have the means to fit sir with a more permanent solution. I have been in discussion with the retinue of the Alchemists' Guild of Ankh-Morpork, and we have considered that we may be able to combine my training, a proprietary concoction that they assure me probably won't explode, a bolt of lightning, a few drops of sir's blood, a few spare body parts from the basement, and a surprisingly simple machine. We might be able to create a permanent solution." "Precisely, sir." Worcester sat in silence for some time, This was creating new life. This was interfering with the work of creation, of the gods. Was this becoming like the gods? Was this unholy than even a vampire might dare to engage with? Would his aunts disapprove? His aunts disapproved of most things, so probably would they really disapprove? Worcester was certain of one thing. It was a decision that required a certain amount of thought. He made his mind up. He would consider it over lunch. Reginald, I've given thought to your proposal, and I've concluded it requires some thought. Perhaps, old chap, I could think about it over lunch? Certainly, sir. I'll show her in. Reginald stood at the edge of a richly decorated ballroom and reflected on the labour of the last couple of years. The undertaking was nearing its conclusion, but there were more wrinkles than were originally planned for. Of course, one of the benefits of being in the service of a vampire is that bodies were not in short supply. With the delicacy of an artist, Reginald chose the palette for his... There he corrected himself creation. The Alchemist Guild, having been furnished with no small amount of gold, had, on the fourth attempt, delivered a small, silvery, purplish vial that continued to bubble weeks after arriving by a small shaken man who assured him that the area around Ludwig would be safe from the fallout in almost no time at all. Reginald, the loyal valet was shaken from his reflections from his master without one. I'm sorry, sir. Reginald continued. Reginald, old Terence here has told me that you know his valet Billinghouse? Apparently Billinghouse has two names. Fancy that. Apparently it's Horace Billinghouse. Sir might then be interested to know that one also has, as you put it, two names. Hugo Worcester realised he knew surprisingly little about the man who had served him all these decades. Suddenly curious, he asked, Well, what is it? Out with it, man. Igor, sir. Igor Reginald. Apparently satisfied, Hugo called out to get the attention of Terence. Reginald considered the beast of iron and copper that had been assembled piece by piece. He had commuted with some individual members of the Guild of Artificers who had separately provided what his master eloquently called the silver bit, the wobbly thing, the coughing hourglass, which he had to admit superficially resembled wit, and the shiny bird's nest thingamabob. Unfortunately, only lightning had sufficient power to perform the deed. The copper lightning rod on top of the North Tower had been easy to explain as the vogue in modern architecture, and apparently Terence had already commissioned one of his own. The party wasn't ideally timed, but it would have been suspicious to decline. It was the end of the season for the Shadow 11. The perfect sport for the Immortal was one that involved lots of waiting for something to happen on dark nights. Occasionally a player would attempt to have the butler do the bit of the game they called standing and catching sometimes, but human physiologies just weren't a match for the ability of the undead to stand in one place doing almost nothing, or for being able to see a ball in the dark except on the fullest of moons. Timing the thunderstorm was the issue. He consulted with Madame Ogham, who had oft aided the farmers in the region with prophecies of the weather. Her hand-written pamphlet, the Old Og, proclaimed that there was a 70% chance of precipitation with a low front coming in from the east that carried a severe weather warning either tonight or tomorrow night. He glanced out of the window. Fast-moving moonlit clouds were gathering. For a moment, Reginald allowed himself to feel a tinge of excitement. Reginald approached Worcester and sought his attention. Sir? Oh, Reginald, old man, I didn't see you. Here, have a drink, won't you? Oh, never mind. Terence erupted in furious laughter, and Reginald smiled a tired and practised smile. Please excuse one's interjection, but sir is required for a small undertaking. Worcester looked briefly confused, as realization slowly dusked. He suddenly ejaculated, Yes, important castle business. Yes, my boon companions, I'll be back in less time than it takes to count a small handful of rice. Please excuse me. Reginald followed Worcester, naturally at a respectful distance, down to the second dungeon, where the undertaking awaited. Reginald inquired as to whether his master recalled the operation of the machine, and in short response was reminded that a vampire never forgets anything, thank you very much. Worcester reached a grand old clock, looked conspiratorially around, knocked the face 3 times. For a second he thought he heard footsteps coming down the hall, but the grand mirror revealed nothing. With utter silence, a bookcase on the opposite side of the room swiveled, revealing a well-lit staircase to the dungeon below. Reginald followed his master down the stairs. "So, Reginald?" "Yes, master," the ever-loyal valet replied. "So the lightning strikes. It goes in those half-filled glasses somehow. You do some nonsense from the alchemists. I hold onto the 2 iron thingies and you pull the lever. Then, what?" Reginald was pleasantly surprised. Whilst Worcester's understanding was, at best, incomplete, he had understood his role in the affair sufficiently. Reginald had attempted some experiments with small samples of the master's blood, but, unfortunately, passing even a small fraction of his immortality to the completely deceased, even in parts, required his nervous system to be part of the loop. He responded, "Then Sir has created life. Marvellous." Dougie, as Worcester dubbed him, lay in state on an ancient stone table in the makeshift workshop. From the terminal that Worcester would hold, 2 small wires connected to his stitched-together temples and two nails deep in his chest. Reginald's workmanship was impeccable. Much of the stitching between limbs was almost imperceptible. Worcester, never to retreat from a hard day's work, insisted on aiding with results that might have been attributed to a child who had first learned to tie his shoes. Suddenly, there was a huge bang! A thick iron rod that connected the roof suddenly lit up white with intense heat. "Blimey, Huey, what was that?" Reginald and Worcester were surprised to see the exclamation came from a somewhat surprised Terence waiting at the base of the staircase. Reginald addressed his distracted master through gritted teeth while carefully spooning a shimmering powder into the vial provided by the alchemists, which promptly began to glow. Sir, that was the lightning bolt. Please pick up the terminals." Terence was not used to being ignored. After all, certain privileges come to the sub-deputy captain of the Shadow 11. "Worcester, I insist on knowing what's going on." Worcester turned to reply. "Well, you see," he was interrupted by his retinue. "The damned terminals, Worcester!" Both Worcester and Terence looked shocked at this uncharacteristically emotive outburst, but at least Worcester was apparently compelled to act. Reginald pulled the lever as Terence reached for one of the glasses. "Well, I never!" Dougie's lifeless body began to tense with charge, and a hand began to grip. It was at this moment that the unexpected visitor's finger made contact with the glass. He was thrown across the room and distracted. Worcester dropped one of the terminals. As he was fumbling for it, he heard exploding glass and a sudden pained yell. He looked across to Reginald to see his valet covered in the charged contents of the vial. Suddenly, with nowhere else for it to go, the feeding back energy grounded itself from the apparatus to Reginald. Reginald's jaw clamped down, biting the tip of his tongue cleanly off, which was caught perfectly by the experienced standing and catcher who should have been holding the terminals. Dougie was smoking and was again perfectly still. Igor Reginald was covered in deep, unbleeding cuts. He was soaked in alchemical fluid. He had sustained a serious oral wound. He permitted himself a brief enunciation summarizing his current position. Fit. Terence hadn't quite come to yet. Reginald looked at the alienated member in his hand. "I'll go get some thread, shall I?"